Welcome to Area 11 of the class. If you'll notice, there's only 13 areas that we have to cover, so the end is very close. I hope that you're hanging in there and are encouraged as we continue to make our way toward the end of the semester. If you're still with me, keep hanging in there, keep doing your stuff, and I think all will be well. So here we are thinking about Area 11, where we're going, what we'll be reading about in the brief PDF reading that you have for this week, and the assignments that you'll be doing. As the missionary movement raged on throughout the 1800s, with all of the folks that we've been talking about, with Carey and Judson and Livingston and the folks in Korea and China, Hudson Taylor, all of those folks are in the 1800s. Meanwhile, back home in America, there were many at work trying to keep the revival fires lit. If you recall, the First Great Awakening had a profound influence on the American colonies in the 1730s and the 1740s as the religious fervor of the earliest colonists waned. After the Revolutionary War, right around 1800, the Second Great Awakening emerged and had a significant impact on a stagnant religious community still getting over the effects of war. Notably, its impact was felt on the frontier as immigrants poured into the new nation, and many of them funneled westward. This awakening, the Second Great Awakening, was part of the impetus for the missionary interest that emerged in America in the early 1800s, led by the Judsons and others. By definition, revivals and periods of awakening do not last forever. There must be slumber for there to be an awakening. Something once alive needs to go dormant for it to be revived. Even though the revival fires of the Second Great Awakening eventually dimmed, there were other evangelists waiting in the wings, working to light other fires, especially in the expanding cities of America. You will read about two of these men this week, Charles Finney and Dwight Moody, arguably two of the most significant figures in American religious life throughout all of American history. Finney was the dominant revivalist voice in the mid-1800s, and then Moody sort of picks up for him in the later part of the 1800s and carries that torch forward. I think it helps to see their work against the backdrop of a couple of factors. One factor that we need to consider is the factor of immigration. There was significant immigration happening throughout the 1800s. This is a time when the population of the United States now was growing exponentially and largely as a result of immigration. During this century, tens of millions of immigrants came to the States, mostly from Europe, but from some other locations as well. I read somewhere that between 1870 and 1900, it was estimated that there were about 15 million immigrants who came to America just in that 30-year period of time. And there were huge numbers as well coming in the earlier part of the 1800s as well. And the only hiccup along the way was the Civil War that happened right there in the middle of it for a period of time. In the early years, most of these immigrants were Protestants of a variety of different stripes, but increasingly immigrants came from Catholic territories as well. And all of this meant new opportunities for evangelism. And because the vast majority of immigrants landed in the large cities on the East Coast, much of the evangelistic work of the later 1800s focused in those areas as well. Finney and Moody both targeted the Northeast significantly during their preaching careers. And there's a sense in which the immigration brought the missionary enterprise to America. No longer was it necessary to go overseas to find those who had never heard the gospel. By the 1800s, they were coming to America by the boatload. And so churches and these significant revival preachers were de facto sorts of missionaries themselves as they worked with this immigrant population. And I think another sort of background factor to remember and to consider during this time revolves around the larger religious landscape of the 1800s. Now, your reading for today doesn't do very much with this, and Tucker really does not do very much with this either. But religious life in America in the 1800s was changing significantly. This was an era of intense religious competition. Not only had Protestants split in hundreds of different directions, all competing for converts, but this was also the century in which Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and other proselytizing groups emerged on the scene as well. You've got broader factors impacting religion. Also, you've got contentious conversations occurred as Christians discussed issues of slavery, alcohol, the role of women, the authority of the Bible, and the findings of Darwin. What are we to do with all those sorts of things? And Christians were in competition as they tried to formulate their ideas and perspectives and theological positions on those particular issues, which just added to the variety of perspectives that already existed. And so it was against this backdrop that Finney and Moody and many others who are lesser known arrived on the scene. They vied for audience attention. They updated their methods and proclaimed what they would call a simple gospel. And so as you read this week, both about Finney and Moody, the work that they did, the way that they adjusted their methods, the way that they include marketing, the way that they include planning into their revival efforts. It all comes against this backdrop of competition and really that the fields are white unto harvest. Right here in America, that was their perspective. And so as much preaching and proclamation as they could do, they were ready to do. And it's a fun and exciting time. I'm glad that you will have a chance to read about them and to gain some perspective through them this week.